to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, we have Timothy Connor. Timothy is the founder and managing director of Synnovate, which provides a wide range of services to companies wanting to do market entry, from market insight, marketing and sales, and even helping organizations with finding the right leader and advisors for their market entry to Japan. He has been helping corporations enter the Japanese market for more than 20 years, and he is an expert in the consumer product space. And today, Timothy will talk about the importance of finding product market fit for the Japanese market for your product as a key component of succeeding in Japan. Could you please give us maybe 2-minute self-introduction to let us get to know you a little bit more?
Sure. Thanks very much for that wonderful introduction, Tyson. And as you said, for the last 20 years, I've spent a large amount of time of my career looking at products and services and how they might be able to come into the Japanese market or not. And from evaluating products and services early on, getting the research done, and then looking at how the product fits into its relevant market here, which is what I'd like to talk about today. Just very quickly, if I tell you about Synnovate, there are 4 practice areas. One is Synnovate Advisory, which is just what we're going to talk about today, market entry. How do you enter and grow in the Japanese market, grow and succeed? The second is Synnovate Design, which is all about the digital and physical omni-channel ecosystems that you can put together here. The third practice area is what I call strategic management. And strategic management is a mix of interim or transformational leadership, as well as market entry and growth leadership. And then our fourth practice area is very new, which is Synnovate Board, which is looking for outside board directors, which is a very important thing for listed companies, of course, but all companies in Japan to have outside directors.
I also believe you're doing a course at Globus. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes. Approximately once a year or slightly less, I do a course at Globus. I'm an adjunct faculty there, and it's called Venture Management. This is a very unique course. Globus Graduate School of Management is founded on the idea of nurturing entrepreneurship. And venture management, which is a later course in the students' field of study there, in which over 6 sessions, the students and me virtually experience startups from the very early stages of just getting going, all the way through to the final stage and the final course, which is all about an IPO and post-IPO and everything that comes in between, like management systems, culture, how do you pivot, how do you grow. It's great fun to teach every time. I've been doing that since 2016.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad to have you on the podcast. When I was starting this series on market entry, I asked around some of my friends, like, who should I get to talk on the podcast? And multiple people said, you got to get Timothy Connor. And what really impressed, and I think hopefully the audience will get as we dive into it, is just how deep you understand all the process and the layers, the steps that goes into a successful market entry effort.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Yeah, so just jumping in, since we're going to focus on product market fit as being a key component, what actually is product market fit?
We're going to assume here that you've, as the owner of the brand or the business, you've done some market research. You've looked at some of the more technical aspects about how do I set up an office, etc. Now it's time to look at the product market fit, which is exactly that. First of all, what is your value proposition of the product into the market? One of the most important aspects, and I'll mention this right off the bat, for any product in Japan is quality. Quality is expressed in every aspect of products and services as well here. From the product itself, how things are put together, how pieces click together, how it's packaged, and how it actually arrives in the consumer's hands. So people who live here might notice that it's very rare to have a product delivered to your home in a box that's not brand new. So even the cardboard boxes are brand new. I think that a good example here is probably Apple and Apple products. The product itself is, of course, perfectly designed, but so is the package, the way it fits in the box, the way the cover comes over the box, the way that you unwrap it when you get it home or in the store. So quality is incredibly important to your product. Some people tend to overlook, they take it for granted that their product is of good quality. You need to look at it from a third point of view, a whole new third eye.
From my experience, there's a Chinese, I think like they make speakers, they make iPhone chargers, or like kind of like headphones, wireless headphones. And they make really high quality products, but they are cheaper. So like I can get a headphones for $20 and they're very good. They last for a long time. I have no issues. And I'm a fan of Anker. I think it's Anker maybe. I think they took it out of the Apple playbook, but like, how can we make something that's cheaper than Apple, slightly cheaper than Panasonic? The packaging looks just as good, if not better than Panasonic, and has the opening experience as well, and great value for the price.
Mm-hmm. It's a quite well-considered brand, Anker.
I think like when I started OneCoin English, most people would assume that you just start from the beginning. Oh, it's OneCoin. You're just kind of like skyrocket like a rocket ship. But actually, when we had the name, a lot of people were doubtful. It's like, if it's OneCoin English, it's probably crap. And so even though we had a really cheap service in Japan, we had to do a lot of work to really change the mindset that it's not crap. And so, yeah, even you would assume with that price that people would just be flying in the door at the beginning. No, we actually had to establish credibility.
Very good. That's something that we hadn't pre-discussed, but the name of your product is incredibly important as well. And how it's going to be translated into or taken by Japanese. There are examples of this worldwide of cars whose names mean funny things in other languages. Assuming that your product is not going to be renamed into Japan, are there any connotations to the way the product name sounds? So you've just given a great example. OneCoin English often refers to OneCoin stores, which are 100 yen stores or dollar stores. And that's probably where it came from. Too bad we didn't meet before you started that, Tyson.
I mean, we have grown relatively fast. I would say very fast, but yeah, could it possibly grown faster? Actually, do you know any companies that have changed their name?
I do. I have an interesting example of that in the sector of one of my clients. In the US, there is a toothpaste called Sensodyne for sensitive teeth, extremely popular and very, very widely sold. In Japan, it has an entirely different name, which is Shumitech. And because they've done so much advertising, etc., it's one of the best-selling toothpaste brands in Japan. But it has a completely different name. And so if you go looking for Sensodyne, you won't find it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I really have no idea where it all came from, but I'm guessing that it has something to do with the word for how something feels when it's sensitive. When you put something cold in your mouth, for example, which is shimiru. And I'm guessing it has something to do with that.
Gotcha.
So speaking about products, the second aspect of product market fit, arguably the most important, are the physical attributes of it. There's, of course, the quality that we just mentioned, but the physical attributes which refer to things like color of the product, of the box, the design, if it's a food or drink, the flavor, the package itself, what does it look like? So one thing that people don't often recognize is that the Japanese in general are very tactile, and also they're really quite emotional. So the look and feel of a product can be arguably the make or break attribute of it. So Japanese consumers typically will always want to touch a product and see how it makes them feel before they ever pull the trigger and buy it.
And I think you had some experience in this too, right? I think you might have helped the client where it wasn't tactile, or like people weren't experiencing tactile, it wasn't doing so well, but then you introduced that and they started getting more sales.
Well, one of the best tactics for coming into the market is doing an actual physical pop-up, which you can do quick and they're not ridiculously expensive, but it's a chance for the consumers here to actually touch and feel your product. a client of mine, which is an oral care client, which are toothbrushes. We ended up setting up an experience center in an experiential retail store in Eon Laketown, where people can come by and actually touch the product. They see it. They're attracted to it because it's attractive, and they can actually touch it and feel it. And it really helps to get a feel of, will I want to use this? Will I enjoy using it, et cetera? And arguably, the things that you put in your mouth are very personal choices after all.
Gotcha. That kind of makes sense because as you're explaining this, it made me think of Tokyo Hands.
Mm-hmm.
And going to that store, it's a large store, a lot of consumer products, and it's all up front in your face. In some cases, I think they actually want you to go ahead and touch things and experience it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's funny that stores don't put more samples out for you to touch and feel, but there is the sanitary aspects to that. And also the fact that it would get in the way.
Do you actually need to have labeling in Japanese?
This is a good question to look into to see if you do need to have labeling in Japanese. And if you do, what needs to be in Japanese? So for certain types of products, there's labeling that you have to have on, that you have to identify things like where the product was manufactured. Possibly you have to have what is it made of? What are the ingredients, especially with food and drink, etc., which need to be in Japanese. When you have an edible product, you don't have to have the best by date in an exact certain format, but any companies that are importing it will ask you to put it in the Japanese format, for example. That said, in terms of packaging, Tyson, do you want to make your product look purely Japanese, or do you want to maintain the foreignness of the product, which is very possibly an important thing to do, especially in terms of price point? It's a differentiator to look like a foreign product. It's good early on as part of your product market fit research to see what needs to be in Japanese and what doesn't. Usage instructions, these types of things, that all needs to be in Japanese.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, because I remember a lot of at least food products or from the import food store. A lot of times it's in the original packaging and they just stamp on the Japanese label, or at least the instructions are in Japanese while the front looks like English.
Sure. Labels on products is very, very common. It's also good to look at flavoring. If it's an edible or drinkable product, a consumable product, there are flavors that are very popular in some countries that may not be popular in Japan. This includes also the sweetness factor. As people will probably recognize, sweets in Japan tend to be not overly sugary. And so if your product is a consumable and it's very, very sugary, you may have difficulty in the market.
Yeah, I know a lot of American candies definitely don't do so well here. Or at least they've been not dumbed down, but I'm not sure sugared down is a word, but watered down maybe to make it less potent.
That's right. Which sort of takes us to ingredients, which is part of this as well. It's good to look into the ingredients. You really need to have the ingredients of a product checked before you come in. In terms of, for example, skincare and cosmetics, if there are certain ingredients in the product that are not on the approved list, you won't be able to bring them in without getting them approved. So in most countries, you have the prohibited ingredient lists. Japan is the opposite. You have the approved ingredient list. And if it's not on that list, you'll have trouble bringing it into the country.
So I guess that's one key component of market research again.
It's something important to do early on. So I have a story about that. We were presented at my former company with a product from the US that came in small, very nicely, I'll call them very cute packaging, very attractive looking for our target market, which would have been 25 to 35-year-old women. And it was flavoring, for water flavorings. So in a glass of water, you squeeze a few drops in, and it gives the water flavor. The sizes were good. The coloring was nice. The flavors were quite interesting. By serendipity, really, all the flavors they used are things that were quite popular here. Zakuro, for example, and watermelon. And as we started to bring it in, we did pop-ups where people could do small taste tests. We ended up with lines of 20, 30, 40 people. But after about 9 months, we were just getting ready to sort of ramp up and look into possibly packaging in Japan. And we learned that they had changed the composition slightly. In the US, it was meant as a good change because the sweetener ingredient was changed to be more natural. And the part of the ingredient that they used, one of the compounds in the ingredient, we're getting very small here, very micro here, was changed to a new compound, which wasn't on the approved lists in Japan.
Oh,
No matter how we searched, we could not find a way to show that it was on the approved list. And we went to the manufacturer's Japanese subsidiary here. They measured many, many kinds of ingredients. And they said that no, that compound is not on the list. And in order to do all the testing and get it on the list, it would take a year and a half and about $2 million.
oh my God.
So you can guess which product did not make it into the country.
Wow, gotcha.
Very, very sad. Very, very unfortunate story.
Just that one tiny thing.
Just one compound and one ingredient.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. Kind of to move on, I think you also mentioned kind of like a size of the product.
Something that you may not notice right away, but everything in Japan is standard sized, of course in metric sized. But if you go to the store, all of the primary school kids' backpacks, the rukso, they're all the same size, even if they're always different colors and designs. All the sizing is standardized, which is one of the great things about this country, so that if you're making covers or etc., it's really easy to make them. You don't have to make several different versions. Things tend to come in smaller volume than in other countries. I mean, the United States, everything comes in arguably too much volume, but everything comes in small volumes here, smaller volume, I should say. And generally speaking, it's a bit smaller, with a very, very big 800-pound gorilla exception, which is Costco. And if you go to Costco, everything is large, everything's super high volume, and they're doing fabulously well. But I think should the president, Ken Terrio, ever listen to this, he'll laugh. I think that still to this day, people tell them, like they told them for the first decade or decade and a half, you'll never make it in Japan. People don't buy product in that volume.
Anyone who goes there will immediately disagree with that statement.
That's correct, yeah.
And I'm always the one who's buying the least. Yeah, you will see Japanese people with 2 carts full filling up their cars. It's a big trip.
Yes, that's the fun of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a raving fan, and I just ate some of my premium kettle chips just before this. And I think I think another one you mentioned to me before was, I think, price as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
When you're looking at the market with your product, it's important to check where does your product fall in terms of price point. So if you're looking at where am I going to be in the market and where do I want to be positioning my product in the market? Am I going to be too expensive? Do I need to raise prices? This is good for working out a competitive map going forward. And it sort of segues into the next thing we talked about, which is who are going to be your users, your consumers, who will be your target. My recommendation to people coming into the market is, first of all, create some customer personas. You can start with your own image of what kind of a customer persona would fit your product and come up with various versions of that. And then little by little, start looking into the market to see how does that fit into the Japanese market? And do those personas even exist in Japan?
No, I think that's really great advice. Sometimes I do digital marketing consultancy for companies, and they'll say like, we want to sell this product. And I'll be like, cool, just who's the target audience? Like, what is their age, gender, income? And a lot of times they're like, oh, actually, we don't have one. It's you have a product, but you don't have a target. So it makes marketing a lot more difficult, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of unnecessary guesswork that could have been done in, let's say, the product market fit stage.
Yes, exactly. And the personas, so to speak, really can focus on things like, what are the lifestyles here? What are the work styles here? Purchasing habits, the idea that people will embrace working from home, it doesn't strike you right away until you realize that often people don't have that much spare space at home, at least in urban areas. What are people's purchasing habits? Buying groceries is something you do every day, every other day, for example. Thinking about the value systems and how consumers think in this country. And you've heard all this before. People talk about it all the time, but it's really where you need to spend some time and invest some time and probably invest some money in looking into these kinds of things. And will this resonate with Japanese consumers?
In another episode, we will dive more to the market research. I found too, just doing marketing to Japanese consumers, there's a lot of things like, some segments, you have to really target them through mobile, make your website for mobile. Other users, certain products, maybe you might get 50-50 desktop or in some cases a little bit more desktop. So you really got to have that customer persona if you really want to target them, especially if you're doing in a competitive market. You really, really need to get that customer persona spot on.
And you could say that the entire Japanese consumer market is incredibly competitive. The Japanese consumer market is probably the most developed and competitive in the world. There might be more products in other markets, but everything is put together so tight here with so much structure. It's just very, very competitive. And the companies behind them are giants. They have more financial resources than God himself.
It could just be the food industry, but I recently read an article. I can't remember who wrote it. So I'm not sure if the information is true, but I think for like the food industry or like certain industries, like kind of like you said, it's very mature and like there's no market, no company that has like more than 20-25% share. And like you have massive companies who still just have like 15% share and they're just duking it out. And I think maybe the beverage industry might be one. You have a lot of big players and no one has like purely dominant.
Personal care products is probably like that as well. That's a whole nother fun podcast we can do one day, Tyson, is how do these companies get market share? There are a number of things that they do that might surprise you if you don't actually, get under the hood and look at the various products in the market. Before we move off of product market fit specifically, I also want to just remind people that look into the regulations about your product. As I mentioned, in personal care products, if you have a certain ingredient, it has to come in as a quasi-drug, which is a lot more onerous in terms of regulations. Electronics and electric things have to have a PSC testing and registration, which if you're selling in Europe already, you probably have it, but it is something you need to look into.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess for the business model fit or product market fit. It's kind of a general question, but how do you know you have it?
Right. So once you've looked through the product market fit, you've probably found quite a lot of good research, good information about actually the business model fit and what's the best way for you to come into the market. There are many ways to come into the market. Early on, finding a way to do some testing of your product in the market is really the only way to know if you have a fit or not. There are various ways to do that, and you can start off without opening, your own KK in Japan. You can still find ways to do that. Doing pop-up type things to test the market, approaching other people in the market who might be able to, importers, for example, distributors here, etc., is one way to find out if you've got it. It's also good to find someone early on who can actually help you sort of navigate this whole process. Somebody who's in country, not necessarily your first employee, but someone who's in country who can take a third party look at both the market and your product. Somebody that doesn't necessarily have a direct relationship.
Gotcha. That makes sense. If you were to jump in, you put in a country manager. Since it's their job and they're working full time, it's in their best interest to prolong it as long as possible.
Sure.
But like you mentioned, having someone, a third party who I would say they don't have the incentive to just purely focus on continuation regardless of product market fit.
Right. The whole idea is to make sure that you've done your research on the market and you've got all the preparations well done in advance. I'll say it now, I'll say it again. Other people will agree. Pretty much everything that you try to do in Japan will take you 3 times as long as any other country. So should your preparation be 3 times as long as any other country.
In a different episode with another guest, we talked about the timeline. And sometimes even the first year is just making sure you have the right person on the ground and doing the market research.
Exactly. The examples of pivots are endless, I'm afraid. But there are many. Making sure that you're coming in with an open mind. And even though you did all your research, you never know what's going to end up hitting in the market. And I mean, Uber's a great example. They come in as a rideshare business, which let's not even get into finding out how they thought that was a good idea. But they pivoted and arguably at the best time to Uber Eats. They pushed and they more or less created that sort of delivery business in Japan, which has had a lot of entries and a lot of high profile retreats as well.
Yeah, that is interesting because Uber itself, but like Uber Eats is huge here. So, and I think you're also telling me about, I think maybe Coca-Cola.
Well, Coca-Cola came into the market and they realized the importance of canned coffee. And so they created the Georgia brand of canned coffee. And I would love to know what percentage of consumers know that Georgia is actually a Coca-Cola product, but it can't be more than half.
Or, I mean, they're so big, you think they're their own brand.
Exactly. I mean, Coca-Cola is master at this. And tea as well. Their tea brands are fabulously successful here and in other countries as well.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I think some of their green tea, I forgot the name, but yeah, it's huge here too. And you actually have to look, it's like, oh, wow, it's actually Coca-Cola.
Yes.
Or Seoul Kenbicha. Actually, I think Seoul Kenbicha is Coca-Cola.
Yes. Another interesting, brilliant pivot actually in my mind is, IKEA tried once to come into the market 30 years ago. And that was like a dog with its tail between its legs when it left. 30 years on, comes back actually with much better information and people. Their choice of locations was much better. But again, in order to really make it in Japan, they slimmed down and they came up with the idea of the urban stores, which they started opening, 3-4 years ago? Right in the middle of Shibuya, you have an IKEA urban store, or in front of Harajuku Station, an IKEA urban store. This is really a brilliant pivot to the market here in Japan, when until now in every country in the world, you've said same design, same large big box format, but in Japan, we're going to go small.
Cool. No, that's really interesting. Yeah. They started doing that. I haven't been to it, but we'll definitely check it out the next time. Cool. Thank you for sharing those 3 examples. And yes, I guess on the topic of market entry, like how can we better understand the market for our entry?
First off, does the market exist? Are there similar products in the market or not? Having similar products is favorable to coming into the market because you have something to compare against. And then how does your product compare to existing products in terms of price, as we mentioned before, availability, and if your product is rather novel or slightly different than others, what are the unique selling points of your product? And will those selling points resonate with Japanese consumers? And again, your market research podcast will probably cover this as well. And then how do you intend to get to consumers? This is the marketing bit of it, isn't it? Okay, you've gotten the product. It seems like it'll work. We can import it. How do you get it to consumers? That's when you start looking at the distribution channels and the sales channels in Japan. Now, one thing that's important to note here, so many products in so many markets, you need to use a Japanese middleman type of wholesaler because there's no other way to get your products into a drugstore, for example, or grocery store, for example. These guys exist, and that's what they exist to do. They're aggregators of large product owners like ourselves.
And I think that's why it's really important for companies who are doing market entry, I think, to work with someone like you. I think sometimes a lot of companies, they just, they believe their product is going to work. So they just kind of reach out to a marketing agency. And obviously the marketing agency is going to tell you, yeah, people love your product. Your product is so cool. We're going to do it. We're going to sell it this way. But if you're going to do market entry, or you need a professional who understands all of the steps, like doing the market research, ensuring you have product market fit, then let's go to market strategy hardcore. But if you just jump straight into the go-to-market strategy with go-to-market people, obviously they're going to tell you we should go to market.
To be successful, first you need to know the ground rules. if you're going to try to get around the ground rules somehow, you need to know what they are. You can take other niche approaches to the market. And if your product is such that, if you are bringing in lower end, if you're wanting to compete with Japanese companies on lower end home usage goods, you need to know how you're going to do that, and that you're going to have to use the wholesaler. The market is very crowded. Your market research will get that for you, etc. Or you can look and you can pivot to a different product into the market, and you may be able to go through more direct ways to the consumer. Or perhaps you have both direct and wholesaler distribution model as well.
Yeah, there's so many different channels. So that's why I want to give the listeners a warning that sometimes the vendors you might be dealing with, or like the marketing agencies, or even some marketing entry firms, to be honest, you need someone who can really see all the stages, or who know a lot of the stages and kind of help you so you don't skip a stage and make a business crushing mistake.
One of the biggest business crushing mistakes you can make is coming in without realizing the importance of the trust relationships here. Coming in and learning what are the key relationships and what are the key trust relationships that you need to work on. And having someone who understands that and sees that here is key. There's the language aspect of it, but if you're coming in without being able to speak Japanese, anyone on the other side is going to put up to speak with you their English speaker. Now, their English speaker may not know as much about the industry as other people in the company that you're talking to. And this is one of the things that so many companies run into, and they don't realize that really nice guy who speaks such great English actually didn't know anything about the industry.
Have you ever found yourself having trouble creating a business plan? Do you pretty much operate on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, creating confusion and chaos in your organization? If that sounds like you, I recommend you join my Entrepreneur Bootcamp. In my bootcamp, you will set an achievable but challenging revenue target for the current or following fiscal year, and we will create a business plan to make it a reality. See more in the show notes below. And now back to our episode. I've experienced that a lot. Luckily, I can speak Japanese, then I'll just ask them if I could speak to their boss in Japanese. Or I'll just ask them a lot of questions that maybe they don't understand. Then say, oh, actually, I can speak Japanese. Can we meet with your boss together? Mm-hmm. But in my interview with another guest, he said something really interesting that we came up with. Is that, and when Japanese companies make agreements, like especially corporations with other companies, it's not like this is like they're coming into like, yeah, we'll just meet them. We'll agree. Let's do it for 1 year and say goodbye. It's, a lot of time when they make an agreement or like a partnership, and especially before they introduce you to their partners, their partner network, they're coming in with a 10-year, 20-year, even lifetime attitude of a partnership with another business.
Absolutely. And those relationships are built on trust. So they have to be absolutely sure about you and their sort of relationship with you, which is why, again, the contract or relationship negotiations guaranteed, they're going to take longer than any other country, making sure that all those T's are crossed, all those I's are dotted. The business cycle is longer, and there are many, many more cycles to go through.
And that's why I think for market entry, especially if it's a highly regulated industry or it's a really hard industry to break in, going with someone who's been in the industry for a long time. I think they sometimes underestimate how valuable that is and the networks that person has in Japan.
Yes, let's talk about that in a separate podcast, because there's a whole can of worms in there, actually, about the appropriate person at the appropriate time.
I can't just have one episode with Timothy because there's too much to talk about, but we're going to do a second episode on what is the right person at the right time to help you with your market entry.
So as you look through this and you look at the channels, etc., then you can start sorting through what are the available entry models, what's available to you in terms of how do I sell in Japan. And the startup in Japan companies, like We Connect, will give you good advice on this as well in terms of the technical aspects of it. But if you start with the least amount of presence here, you have cross-border selling, where you just sell your product from Canada into Japan through Amazon.co.jp or Rakuten. If you've got the resources to promote it here in Japan, it can work. especially if you're an online business, for example. A second version would be a licensing agreement, whereby somebody licenses your product or your name, your brand, and then manufactures it on their own. Some companies use this model in every country that they go to, and it works for some products. Then you have the idea of appointing a master distributor for the country or a sole distributor. By the way, the idea of having multiple distributors for your product in Japan is very, very difficult to do. It's hard to manage anyway. But distributor A will not be happy that there's a second distributor in the market competing with him.
Gotcha. Comes to trust.
It is. It's about trust and competition. Distributor A will not want distributor B in the market when you're both competing to get into the Matsukio drug chain. It's not necessarily healthy. If, however, your business is built on multiple distributors, you also have to assume that you're going to have parallel imports coming in, which may or may not bother you. The next would be a 50-50 venture with somebody. For example, Timothy USA goes into a joint venture with Tyson here, Tyson Japan, and we create Tyson Timothy KK. And that's the business we run here. Again, there are joint ventures have their unique challenges. Or you have the golden goose, which is to go direct, 100% owned subsidiary. Over time, most foreign companies that came in partnered with somebody or they did joint ventures with somebody, ultimately they go direct if they have the resources, because you can simply control your own destiny. I wouldn't pretend to today discuss in which model is perfect. It's really a question of your industry, your sector, the resources you have. Being able to evaluate all of these with somebody who knows the market here is immensely valuable.
And we're going to have another episode just purely on this topic of which distribution channel you should take. And I appreciate you giving an outline of the possible types. And I'm sure there's probably more. I think that'll kind of set the pace for the next episode where we can dive much deeper into it. So,
and
yeah,
it's difficult to say, A is better than B necessarily. But as I mentioned, it's being able to work with someone who can help you evaluate these is immensely valuable, I think.
I agree. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to our next episode together on choosing the right temporary leader to help lead your market entry efforts or scale or even grow your company in Japan.
It's a nascent, doesn't exist. That we need more in the market of this type of strategic leadership.
Yeah, I think that'll be really, really useful because it's not just product market fit. It's finding the person who's the right fit at the right stage of the company.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you have any asks or where can our audience find more about you?
I'd be pleased to welcome everyone to visit www.synnovate.jp, and that's SYNNOVATE.jp.
And we'll have your LinkedIn profile and the Synnovate website in the link notes.
And I welcome direct messaging on LinkedIn as well, if you have any questions.
Awesome.
And if you don't agree with anything I have to say here, please, I'm excited to hear any kind of comments or feedback from anyone.
Thank you so much, Timothy.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tyson. It's been a great pleasure.